Halloween has always been about scares, but sometimes the scariest things aren't the monsters or ghosts people talk about. Sometimes it's what people themselves are capable of. This story happened back in 2014 when I was 20. My group of friends was obsessed with pulling pranks on Halloween night. We thought it was funny to dress up, scare kids, sneak around the neighborhood, nothing too serious. But that year, Jake, our self-proclaimed leader, had a new idea. He said we should take it to the next level. "Let's do something no one forgets," he grinned, sipping from a soda. "Like, let's freak someone out so bad they'll talk about it for years." We all laughed at first, but the way he said it made me uneasy. Jake always took things too far. Our target ended up being Mr. Wallace, an older man who lived 2 streets down from me. He was a quiet, lonely guy, maybe in his late 60s. People said he used to be a school teacher, but now he just stayed home with his dog. He rarely decorated for Halloween, except for putting 1 pumpkin on his porch. Jake decided that was perfect. "Old guy like him, he'll probably have a heart attack," Jake joked. Everyone laughed except me. Something about the way he said it gave me chills. But I didn't want to be the one who ruined the fun, so I kept my mouth shut. That night, we dressed in black hoodies with cheap plastic masks covering our faces. We had fake knives, toy chains, even a bloody rubber hand that Jake thought was hilarious. Around 11:30 p.m., we made our way to Mr. Wallace's street. The neighborhood was dead quiet by then, most of the porch lights off. Only his porch glowed faintly with the flicker of that single pumpkin. His dog barked once from inside, then went silent. We crept up the driveway, muffling our laughter. The plan was simple: knock on the door, and when he opened, we'd scream, wave the props around, and then run. Stupid, childish, but harmless, or so I thought. Jake banged on the door, 3 loud knocks that echoed into the night. We all ducked low, hiding in the shadows, waiting for him to appear. The porch light clicked on, and the door creaked open. Mr. Wallace stood there in a robe, looking confused. His thinning gray hair stuck out in messy clumps, and his glasses sat crooked on his face. "Hello?" he called out, his voice raspy. That's when Jake jumped out first, wearing a skeleton mask and holding the fake knife. He let out this guttural scream and lunged forward. The rest of us made noises, waving props, trying to look terrifying. For a moment, it worked. Mr. Wallace staggered back, his eyes wide in shock. His hand clutched his chest. Then, everything went wrong. Instead of screaming, Mr. Wallace collapsed. His body hit the floor with a sickening thud. His glasses snapped. The pumpkin tipped over and rolled off the porch, candle still flickering. At first, we thought he was playing along. Maybe he fainted. Maybe he was pretending. We stood there, frozen, until I heard the most haunting sound. His dog barking frantically from inside, whining and scratching at the door. "Shit, he's not moving," Lisa whispered. Jake laughed nervously. "He's faking it, come on!" But he wasn't. I could see the way his chest wasn't rising, the way his hand twitched just once before going still. My stomach dropped. "Jake? I think he's really—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. That's when Jake panicked. "Run. Don't say anything. We were never here." And just like that, he bolted into the darkness. One by one, the others followed him into the darkness, leaving me standing on the porch staring at the motionless body of the man we had just scared to death. I wanted to call for help, but fear paralyzed me. My phone felt like at 100 pounds in my pocket. What if they blamed me? What if they blamed us? So I ran too. The next morning, the street was buzzing with gossip. An ambulance had come in the middle of the night. Someone said Mr. Wallace had been found by a neighbor walking their dog. He had suffered a massive heart attack. Nobody suspected us. Nobody said anything about masked figures on his porch. It was written off as a tragedy, an old man dying alone on Halloween night. But the guilt ate me alive. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him falling, heard his dog's frantic barking. A week later, I decided to walk past his house. The windows were dark, the blinds shut tight. But on the porch, there was something strange. A new pumpkin sat where the old one had been, except this one wasn't carved in a smile. It had jagged, angry slashes for eyes and a mouth twisted into something that almost looked like a scream. No one had touched the house since his death. Who had put it there? That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of scratching. At first, I thought it was a branch against my window, but when I turned, my blood ran cold. On my desk, sitting in the faint glow of my nightlight, was the pumpkin from Mr. Wallace's porch. Its jagged mouth seemed wider now, the candle inside burning on its own. I jumped out of bed, heart hammering, and stumbled backward. The room smelled like smoke, faint but sharp, like burned wood. The scratching grew louder now, coming from my closet door. My dog whimpered at the foot of my bed, staring at it, ears pinned back. I couldn't move. Then, from inside the closet, came a raspy voice, low, broken, but clear enough to hear. You thought it was a joke. The pumpkin flickered violently. My dog barked and backed away. I don't remember what happened next. I woke up the next morning with the closet door wide open, the pumpkin gone, and 3 long scratches carved into the wood of the door. It's been nearly 10 years since that Halloween. I've moved out of that neighborhood, moved across the state, but every Halloween, no matter where I am, I find one thing waiting on my porch when I wake up in the morning. A pumpkin. Always with jagged eyes, always with that screaming mouth, and sometimes, carved in the back of it, a single word: run.
Halloween of 2019 started out like any other for me. I was 24, living in a small town in Ohio, and working late shifts at a diner off the highway. That year, Halloween fell on a Thursday, and by the time my shift ended, it was almost midnight. I wasn't in costume, I wasn't at a party, I was just tired, smelling like fried food and ready to crash in my bed. My car, a beat-up silver Toyota, waited in the dimly lit parking lot. The streets were unusually empty. Halloween decorations swayed in the wind, plastic skeletons clattering faintly on porches as I pulled out onto the main road. The drive home usually took about 20 minutes. That night, it would take me almost 4 hours, and it's a ride I will never forget. 10 minutes into the drive, I saw flashing lights ahead. Police cars had blocked off the highway due to an accident. The officer waved me toward a back road that wound through farmland and woods before eventually reconnecting to the main road. I had never taken that road before, but I didn't argue. The GPS showed a 30-minute detour, and I figured I'd just get home a little later. The road was narrow, no streetlights, just my headlights carving through the dark. Cornfields stretched out on either side, tall stalks rustling in the wind like whispers. The further I drove, the more isolated it felt. About 15 minutes in, my radio cut out. Static hissed through the speakers, then died completely. I reached to switch it off when I saw something move on the side of the road. A figure. At first, I thought it was just a scarecrow propped near the cornfield, but as my headlights swept over it, I realized it was a person, a man, standing perfectly still at the edge of the road, facing the corn, not me. He wore a tattered suit, his head tilted unnaturally to one side. I slowed, confused, my stomach tightening. Who just stands out here in the middle of nowhere at midnight? As I passed him, I saw something that made my hands grip the wheel tighter. His face wasn't covered, but it also wasn't right. His skin looked stretched, his mouth hanging slightly open as though frozen mid-scream. I sped up, not daring to look back. 5 minutes later, my headlights caught another figure, This one stood directly in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes, heart pounding, tires squealing against the cracked asphalt. It was a young woman, maybe mid-20s, wearing what looked like a torn Halloween dress costume. She was barefoot, her long dark hair hanging in her face. She didn't move as my car skidded to a stop just feet away from her. She just stood there, her head slowly lifting until her eyes met mine through the windshield. Her lips moved. I couldn't hear anything, but I swear she was mouthing the words, "Help me." I cracked my window, my voice shaking. "Are you okay?" No answer. She just stared. Then suddenly, she turned and bolted into the cornfield. I should have driven away right then, but something in me, guilt, fear, I don't know, made me put the car in park and step out. The cold night air stung my face as I called after her. "Hello? Do you need help?" The cornfield swallowed her. Silence pressed in around me. The only sound was the wind rustling the stalks. Then from deeper inside the field, I heard it. A man's laugh. Low, mocking, too deliberate to be an accident. I jumped back into my car and floored it, my headlights bouncing wildly on the road as I sped forward. According to my GPS, I should be close to reconnecting to the highway, but the road just kept going. Mile after mile of endless cornfields, no houses, no turns, no signs. Then I noticed the same thing again. The man in the suit. He was standing on the side of the road again, same tilted head, same stretched, screaming face. I swore my stomach flipped. I had passed him miles ago, but there he was, unchanged, like the world had looped itself. I pressed the gas harder. My car rattled as the speedometer climbed, but no matter how far I drove, the road repeated itself. The woman appeared again too, this time crawling out of the corn and onto the asphalt, dragging herself with unnatural jerks. I swerved around her, almost losing control. My breathing was ragged now. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, that I was tired, maybe hallucinating. But then my phone buzzed in the cup holder. One new text message. From unknown number. Don't stop. I threw my phone aside, my eyes locked on the endless road. I just wanted to see an exit, a light, anything. That's when I heard the sound. Breathing. Slow, steady, coming from behind me. My chest froze. With shaking hands, I tilted the rearview mirror down just slightly. There was someone in my back seat. Not a man, not the woman, something else entirely. Its body was pale, skin stretched too tight over bones, its arms far too long. It crouched low, its face hidden in the shadows. But its mouth was wide open, like it was waiting to scream but never did. I didn't think. I just slammed on the brakes, threw open my door, and ran into the cornfield. The stalks whipped against my face as I stumbled blindly forward, trying to put distance between myself and the car. The night was alive with whispers, voices hissing all around me. Somewhere behind me, the car door slammed. Heavy footsteps followed into the field. I ducked low, crawling through the dirt, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to scream, but every sound in my throat caught like barbed wire. Then, just a few feet ahead, I saw her again. The woman in the torn dress. She crouched between the stalks, her face blank now, her eyes hollow. I froze, but she slowly raised her hand, pointing to the left. I didn't know why, but I listened. I ran in the direction she pointed, crashing through the stalks until suddenly I burst out onto a different road. This one was lit. Streetlights lined the edge. In the distance, I saw the highway. I sprinted until my lungs burned, until I flagged down a passing car. The driver, a middle-aged man, looked at me like I was insane, covered in dirt, gasping for breath. But he let me in and drove me straight to a gas station. When I looked back, the road I had come from wasn't there anymore, just empty field. To this day, I don't know where I went that night. The GPS showed nothing unusual. The police brushed me off when I tried to report it. But every Halloween since, I've had the same nightmare. Driving that road, seeing the suited man, the woman, and the thing in my back seat. The worst part? Last Halloween, I found something tucked under my windshield wiper after work. A candy wrapper. Crumpled, greasy, with 3 words scrawled in ink. See you soon.
Halloween has always been my favorite night of the year, but after what happened 2 years ago, I can't look at it the same way again. That night, I was 17 and staying home alone. My parents were out at a costume party, and I decided I'd just hand out candy to the trick-or-treaters. The evening started out normal. Kids in costumes, laughter echoing from the street, the smell of pumpkins and candles drifting in through the door every time I opened it. But around 10 p.m., the doorbell rang again. I opened it to see a tall figure standing there. He wore a plain, old-fashioned mask, almost like a porcelain face, cracked near the eye. Unlike the kids earlier, he wasn't holding out a bag, and he wasn't saying trick or treat. He just stood there. I laughed nervously, thinking maybe it was some teenager trying to scare me. "Nice mask," I said, dropping candy into the empty hands he held out. But he didn't move. He didn't speak. He just tilted his head slowly, like he was studying me. The silence dragged on. My chest felt tight. Happy Halloween," I muttered, shutting the door quickly. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps on my porch again. When I peeked through the pee-hole, the man was still there, only this time his head was pressed against the glass, his cracked mask filling my view. My heart dropped. I backed away, grabbed my phone, and texted my mom, but she didn't reply. Then I heard it, scratching at the door. Long, slow drags of his nails against the wood, like he was trying to get in, but wanted me to hear it. I turned off the lights, crouched low, and prayed he would leave. After what felt like forever, the scratching stopped. I thought maybe he was gone, until my phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. The message read, "You look better without the lights on." When my parents came home an hour later, the man was gone, but the mask, the same cracked mask, was left lying on our porch, facing the door. To this day, I don't know who he was or how he got my number.
Back when I was in college, my friends and I had this tradition of doing something scary on Halloween night. Usually it was just dumb stuff, like watching horror movies or walking through a cemetery. But one year, my friend Jake had a worse idea. He suggested we explore this old abandoned house just outside town. Everyone in the neighborhood called it the Henderson place. The story went that the family who lived there in the 70s just vanished one night. Nobody ever moved in after that. The windows were broken, the paint peeled off the walls, and the front yard was buried in weeds. There were 4 of us: me, Jake, Lisa, and Eric. We drove out there around midnight. The air was freezing, and the trees around the property creaked like old bones. I remember my stomach turning as soon as we stepped through the rusted gate. Inside, the house smelled like mildew and rotting wood. Our flashlights barely cut through the dark, and the silence was so heavy it made my ears ring. We tried to act brave, joking around as we walked through the living room, but none of us laughed for long, because in the hallway, written in faded red across the wall, were the words, "I never left."
Lisa swore it was just graffiti, but the letters were smeared like they'd been dragged by fingers. Still, we pressed on, going up the stairs. That's when we all heard it. A door slammed shut somewhere above us. Eric whispered, "Did you hear that?" We froze, holding our breaths. Then came the sound of slow, heavy footsteps. Not ours. They were pacing across the floorboards upstairs, right above our heads. Jake tried to laugh it off, saying it was the wind. But when we turned to leave, we noticed something chilling. The words on the hallway wall had changed. The red letters now read, "I see you." Lisa screamed. We bolted for the door, but as I glanced back one last time, I swear I saw a figure at the top of the stairs. It wasn't moving, just standing there in the dark, watching. We didn't stop running until we got back to the car. To this day, none of us talk about it. But every Halloween since, I've had the same nightmare, standing at the foot of that staircase while something waits for me in the dark. If you ever find an old full-length mirror at a Halloween party, do me a favor, don't stand too close, and for God's sake, don't tell it your name. I'm not one for ghost stories out loud. I like to laugh about them, to poke at the edges. But this happened to someone I used to work with. She swore it was real, and the way she told it, I felt my skin go cold. She asked me not to share names, so I'll call her Nina. This is Nina's story, as she told it to me, word for word. Nina's college friends rented an old community hall on the edge of town for Halloween. The place looked perfect for a party. High ceilings, a stage at one end, faded wallpaper with roses, and a secondhand mirror leaning against the coat room wall. The mirror did not belong to the hall. One of the older neighbors, the kind who keeps to herself, dropped it off earlier that week and said, "It's heavy, use it if you want." Nobody thought much of that. That night, the hall filled up. People came in costumes, plastic fangs, thrift store prom dresses, a guy who was shockingly committed to being a full zombie. The playlist was loud, the beer was cheap, and the laughter sounded like the room would never end. They had set up a small corner with a camera and props for costume photos, a cardboard microphone, fake mustaches, a witch's hat that kept spinning off its stand. The mirror sat right beside the coat hooks, half in shadow. It had a thin chip on the top corner and a ring of dark where someone had once tried to polish it clean. From the start, people loved checking themselves in it. It was tall and the glass was extra clear, like it showed you differently than the cheap mirrors everyone had on their phones. Around midnight, when the party felt like it had hit a comfortable buzz, someone suggested a mirror dare. It started as a joke. One person would go stand in front of the mirror, stare at themselves for 30 seconds, and confess something to the mirror out loud. Whoever did it had to keep a secret they told the mirror for the rest of the night. The group egged each other on, like drunk friends do. Nina said she'd do it. She liked dares and had that calm, nervous energy that made others cheer her on. She stood in front of the mirror. She was wearing an old-school uniform she'd thrifted, pleated skirt, sweater vest, white collar. The mirror reflected the costume, but the room around her looked a little darker in the glass. She laughed, cleared her throat, and whispered something she says she still wishes she hadn't. Her first name, and then a silly secret from high school she'd never told anyone. When the crowd erupted in applause, she turned to leave and froze. In the glass, behind her shoulder, for a breath, someone else stood in the doorway. It was only visible for a second, quick as a blink. A small shape hunched, like a child wrapped in too big clothes. Nina spun around. The doorway was empty. The hall kept playing. People shoved their way closer, wanting to try the dare themselves. "Probably a trick of the light," someone said. "Reflections do weird stuff." They laughed it off. But later, two of the quieter people at the party, the ones who always showed up late and left early, slipped away to the coat room. They came back pale. One of them, Mark, grabbed Nina by the arm hard enough that it left a tiny crescent mark. "You saw it," he hissed. Nina shook her head. She didn't know what he meant. Mark swallowed, like he was trying to say something that lodged in his throat. Finally, he said, "There's a photo in the mirror. A picture, like an old Polaroid. I swear I saw it. There was a kid in it. The date on the bottom was today. People started saying they'd seen the same thing, a small figure for a second in the reflection that wasn't in the room. At first it was funny. Who invited the kid? But the jokes thinned out into nervous looks. By 2 in the morning, the party had shrunk. People had drifted to couches and the stage. Nina and a small group of friends were the last cluster on the dance floor. The mirror's glass caught the strobe lights and made the coat room look like it was breathing. Nina went over to hang up her coat and, on impulse, checked the mirror again. She was alone in the room. The reflection was quiet. She noticed a small handprint on the inside surface of the glass, faint, like someone had pressed with cold fingers. She hadn't seen it before. She ran her thumb across it. The glass was smooth. She laughed it off and turned to leave. Then she heard a soft giggle from behind the coats, like someone was playing with plastic hangers. She told me she felt all at once a strange, childish presence. The giggle came again, closer, right behind the mirror where the coat draped slack. She moved the coats aside and nearly knocked over the mirror. On the floor, tucked behind a folded cardigan, was an old photograph. Not a Polaroid, a creased black and white snapshot with curling corners. On the back, in messy handwriting, someone had written a name and a date. The date was from 40 years ago. That should have been the end of it. A lost photo, probably dropped weeks earlier. But Nina told me the details she remembered like a tape she'd replayed. In the photo, the little girl wore the exact sweater vest Nina had on tonight. The same pattern, the same tiny stain by the hem. She checked. The stain matched. Her friends decided they'd had enough of the mirror dare. They carried the mirror into the hall storage closet and leaned it against the concrete wall, face covered with an old blanket. They laughed less now. Their jokes had a brittle edge. The music was down to a low hum. People started to leave in dribs and drabs. Nina's group helped sweep up. Someone put the photograph on the table with the discarded cups. Nina went outside for air. The night was cold and smelled of wet leaves and the lake. She sat on a bench and talked with Mark about small life things, jobs, the upcoming semester, not about giggling coats or the mirror. When she stood to go back inside, she saw across the hall, through the fog of the double doors, the silhouette of someone standing still beneath the lobby light. It looked like a child, back to the door, hands in pockets. At first, she thought it was one of the kids from the neighborhood group playing hooky. But then it moved, turned, slowly to look toward the windows. Nina's chest heightened because when the figure turned, its face seemed to be the face from the photograph. She ran back in. "Hey, hey!" she shouted, trying to sound silly, like a shout in a bar. "Yo, you left your—" Nobody in the hall answered. The room was mostly dark, chairs stacked. A forgotten streamer hung from a beam. On the table by the coat room, the old photograph lay face down. The blanket was gone from the mirror. The mirror stood uncovered, tall as a doorway, and in its glass, the hall looked whole and bright, except, in the reflection, someone sat on the bench outside. A small person, small shoulders, head cocked, looking straight at the mirror. She could not tell if the person was outside or only in the glass, and the reflex to move closer felt like pushing through water. Her breath fogged the glass. She saw her own face, pale, eyes wide. For a second, she laughed at herself, but that laugh died. In the reflection behind her, someone had stepped up behind the coats. A small hand tapped the mirror once, softly, the sound like a fingernail on a china cup. Nina told me she didn't remember running. She only remembered the feeling of a foot catching on a chair, of the blanket falling in a gust, of her hands on the frame, and of the glass being cold and alive under her palms. She flung the mirror forward. It crashed on the linoleum and shattered with a bell ring that made every hair on her arm stand up. The shards sprayed like little moons across the floor. There was a sound, not from glass, but inside the shards, like whispered giggling folded into the edges. Mark screamed. Somebody screamed. The small figure outside the door, if there'd been one, had stepped away. The hall was suddenly full of people again, drawn to the crash. In the shards, Nina said she saw faces. Not her face, but faces layered, overlapping, snapshots of the room from that night and other nights. And in the very center, on a piece no bigger than a hand, was the small girl from the photograph. Her eyes were open and black as chips. She looked straight at Nina and smiled. No one saw the girl leave. The police were called for broken glass, for a noise complaint, for strangers in the parking lot. People took keys and coats. The story spread in little clipped ways. Mirror broke. We thought it was a prank. Somebody dropped a photo. Nina's friends cleaned the floor with brooms. Someone took the photograph and tucked it into their coat pocket without telling anyone. Mark said later he burned it in his car. He swore to Nina that when he looked away for a second and then back, the photo on the seat had a new crease across the girl's mouth, like a cut. After that night, people stopped going to costume parties at that hall. The neighbor woman took back the mirror when the group called to ask her about it. She talked like she'd hoped someone would ask. And when they asked her why she left it, she said, "It belonged to my sister."
She said the sister had 2 small kids once and then didn't. She said she didn't like mirrors after that. She said she was sorry, but couldn't talk about it. Months later, and here is the part that made me feel cold when Nina told it. Nina saw a photo online. A friend had posted a throwback from their neighborhood's old Halloween celebrations in the 70s. In the comment thread, someone had scanned photos from a lost box. Nina clicked through. There, in the pile, was the same photo she'd found behind the coats. The girl's smile was flipped now, different by a fraction, like a face seen in a different shadow. Someone had commented on the post, that kid was never seen after Halloween that year. 2 weeks after that, Nina started waking to small sounds at night, like a hanger tapping the closet door in her apartment, like a giggle folded under the floor. She would sit up, listen, and the sound would stop. Once, just before dawn, she opened her bedroom door to a hallway and found, at the far end, a shape hunched in the window light. It turned its head toward her slowly. It had the same empty smile from the photograph. Nina bolted the door and kept moving until the clatter of her own footsteps drowned anything else. When she told me this, she leaned forward and said, "I don't know what wants out of those mirrors. I don't know what it takes. I only know this: you remember faces, you keep them with you. Sometimes they come to look for their photograph." She never said she saw the girl step into the hall. She never said she saw the girl leave. The twist, the thing that settled like a weight in her voice, was what she hadn't said at first. The night the mirror shattered, Nina woke up with a faint outline on her own forearm. It wasn't a bruise. It looked like the smear of a small hand, pale, like someone had pressed there and then wiped their fingers away. It faded after a while. Nina told me she still dreams about that blank smile, and sometimes in crowds she feels a small cold hand slip into her coat pocket and press something into her palm. When she looks, there's nothing there but a scrap of blue paper, like the edge of an old photograph. Her last line to me was simple and small. "If you ever find a mirror at a party, just don't stare too long. Don't give it your name." She asked me not to post her name. She asked me not to go back there. I'm telling you this because she wanted someone to know what happened, and because sometimes knowing is the only defiance you've got.
If someone at a Halloween party ever dares you to play a game in the basement, remember this story before you say yes. Some games don't end when the night does. This one happened back in 2014 to a guy named Aaron, who told it to me years later like a confession. He was in his 20s, living in Ohio, and every year his friend group threw massive Halloween parties in a rented farmhouse just outside town. The farmhouse was cheap to rent, and it had the perfect vibe: creaky floors, peeling wallpaper, and most importantly, a big unfinished basement. That year, somebody brought up the idea of a basement dare. You'd go down alone, sit in the dark with a candle, and play what they called the knock game. It sounded stupid, but the rules were simple. Sit in the circle of candlelight. Ask the basement if anyone is here. If you hear 3 knocks, you must answer one question truthfully out loud. When the candle goes out, the game is over. Aaron wasn't the type to believe in ghost games, but he was drunk enough, bold enough, and loud enough to say yes. His friends shoved him toward the stairs, laughing and chanting his name. He carried a candle in one hand and a lighter in the other. The basement was colder than the rest of the house. It smelled like mildew and iron. The single bulb dangling from the ceiling didn't work, so the only light was the small, shivering flame of his candle. The stairs groaned with each step, and the laughter from upstairs faded as the door closed behind him. He sat on the dusty floor, lit the candle, and tried to laugh at himself. "Okay, basement," he said. "If anyone's here, knock 3 times. Silence, just the faint drip of water somewhere in the pipes. He shook his head, smirking. Then it came. 3 sharp knocks, tap, 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 from the far corner of the basement where the shadows pressed in thick. The sound was too deliberate, too heavy to be pipes. Aaron froze. His breath caught in his throat, but the rules were the rules. He forced a laugh and said, "All right, fine. Ask me something." There was no voice, no whisper, no words in the air. But inside his head, not his ears, but deeper, like something brushing against his thoughts, he heard a question. "What are you most afraid of?" He panicked. He thought about spiders, about heights, about being alone. But the truth clawed its way out of him before he could stop it. "I'm afraid of dying alone." His own voice shook as he said it. The second it left his lips, the candlelight bent. The flame leaned sideways as if something had exhaled hard right next to him. He clenched his teeth and whispered, "Game's over. I'm done." But the candle didn't go out. The rules said it only ends when the flame dies. And then 3 more knocks, louder this time, closer. Aaron backed toward the stairs, clutching the candle. He wanted to blow it out himself, but his pride stopped him. He didn't want to come upstairs and admit he'd cheated. He told himself it was a prank, that his friends were down there with him, hiding. He shouted, "Very funny, guys, you can stop now." No answer, just the slow, dragging sound of something moving in the dirt, circling him. The knocks started again, faster, coming from different walls like there were more than one set of hands pounding. The candle shook in his grip. He stood, heart racing, ready to bolt, and then the flame sputtered, bent sideways, and died. Total blackness. He didn't scream, not yet, but in the pitch dark, he heard breathing. Not his. Slow, ragged, wet breathing, inches from his ear. Then a whisper, low and guttural, "Not yet." Aaron sprinted up the stairs, slamming into the basement door so hard it rattled. His friends burst into laughter when he stumbled out, pale and shaking. They thought he was faking it, that he was the best actor of the night. He tried to explain, but the words felt thin in his mouth. He gave up and just drank until morning. But here's the part that stuck with him, and the part that made me believe him when he told me. The next morning, when the party was over and the sun had come up, Aaron went to grab his coat from the hook near the basement door. Taped to the inside of the coat pocket was a yellowed slip of paper. He didn't put it there. On it, in smudged handwriting, were 3 words, "Die alone here." Aaron never went back to that farmhouse. None of them did. A year later, when someone drove past it, they said the windows were all boarded up and a condemned sign was nailed to the porch. Nobody rents it out anymore. Aaron told me he still doesn't know if it was a prank or if something in that basement heard his fear and promised to make it real. But every year on Halloween, he swears he hears faint knocking in his apartment walls. Always 3 times.
Some stories don't begin with shadows in a basement or whispers in the dark. Sometimes the horror is so ordinary at first that you don't even notice it's begun. For Jamie, it started with a plastic Halloween mask bought from a discount store. and ended with something no one could explain. Jamie was 17 when it happened, a senior in high school. That year, one of the kids in his class threw a huge Halloween party, the kind where everybody showed up, even the ones who usually hated parties. The theme was come as anything, which meant some people wore elaborate costumes, while others just threw on fake blood and called it a night. Jamie didn't have money for a real costume. The day of the party, he stopped by one of those seasonal Halloween shops that pop up in empty strip malls. Everything was too expensive except for a dusty clearance bin near the back. Inside it were a handful of masks, rubber clowns, half-melted skulls, and one plain white mask with hollow black eyes and no mouth opening. Cheap plastic, stiff straps. The tag said $2.99. Jamie grabbed it, thinking it was creepy in a funny way. The party was already in full swing when he arrived. People laughed at his mask at first. It was so blank and strange compared to everyone else's costumes. But the longer the night went on, the more unsettling it became. Friends would glance at him across the room, shiver, then quickly look away. The mask didn't have expressions, but somehow it felt like it did, like it was watching people even when Jamie wasn't. He didn't think much of it, until he tried to take it off. Sometime after midnight, Jamie went to the bathroom to splash water on his face. He tugged at the mask's strap, but it wouldn't budge. The cheap elastic cut into his skin when he pulled. He laughed nervously and tried harder. The mask didn't move. It was like it had sealed itself against his face. At first, he thought he was drunk or panicking, but then he noticed something worse. His voice didn't sound the same. When he tried to call for help, his words came out muffled and strange, like they were echoing from deep inside the plastic. He banged on the bathroom door until his friend Nate forced it open. Nate saw him clawing at the mask and thought he was pulling a prank. "Chill, dude, it's just a mask," Nate said, laughing. But when Nate grabbed it and yanked, Jamie screamed. The mask didn't peel back. It stretched with his skin, like it had fused. By now, Jamie was sobbing. His fingernails scraped along the plastic but left no mark. Nate swore under his breath, pale now, and said they should get help. But before they could, the bathroom light flickered and went out. In the mirror's faint reflection, Jamie saw his own body standing there, except the mask's eyes weren't hollow anymore. They were filled with something black, shifting like ink. And the mouth, which had been solid plastic before, now had the faint outline of lips, lips that curved into a smile. Jamie backed away from the mirror, but the reflection didn't move. It just smiled wider until black liquid dripped from where the mouth should be. Jamie shouted, fumbling with the door. The knob jammed. They were locked in. The last thing Jamie remembers from that night is the reflection raising its hand, not his hand, its hand, and pressing it flat against the inside of the mirror. A pale hand, but not human. The mirror cracked like ice. When the others finally broke down the door, Jamie was on the floor, shaking. The mask was gone. Just gone. Not on his face, not on the floor, not anywhere. His skin, where the strap had been, was raw and red like it had burned him. Jamie never found the mask again. Nobody did. The Halloween store closed down a month later, abandoned without warning. And sometimes when Jamie walks past windows at night, he swears his reflection isn't quite right. Sometimes he sees the mask looking back, blank and waiting, like it never left.
There are some parties you regret missing, and some you regret attending. This is about one that should never have happened at all. It was Halloween night, 2009. A group of college students in upstate New York decided to crash what they thought was a private party in an abandoned mansion on the edge of town. The place was huge, 3 stories, ivy growing up the walls, and broken windows covered in plastic. Everyone in town said it used to belong to a family that vanished decades ago. People joked it was haunted, but that's what made it perfect for a Halloween night. The weirdest part, though, was the music, or the lack of it. When the group walked inside, the air felt heavy, stale, but the mansion was lit, every chandelier glowing with dull yellow bulbs, candles flickering in every room, and there were people inside. At least, they looked like people. Dozens of them, dressed in old-fashioned costumes, lace gowns, suits with high collars, carnival masks with cracked paint. They mingled in the halls, holding crystal glasses. But there was no music, no laughter, no sound except for faint shuffling feet and the clink of glass. Aaron, one of the students, said later it was like walking into a party where the volume had been turned all the way down. Everyone moved as if they were following music that wasn't there, dancing in silence. At first, the students thought it was brilliant, a silent party maybe. They laughed nervously and grabbed drinks from the long dining table. The liquid was dark red, metallic tasting. One of them spit it out and whispered, "That's not wine." Still, they stayed, because leaving immediately would mean admitting how wrong it all felt. But then Aaron noticed something. Nobody was blinking. The guests smiled and swayed, but their eyes stayed fixed, wide and glassy. And whenever one of the students tried to speak, the nearest guest would turn their head too slowly, as if pulled by invisible strings, and stare until the student went quiet. Then, upstairs, a piano started playing. But there was no piano in the house. The sound was faint, drifting down the halls, a thin, sour melody that made Aaron's teeth ache. The guests all stopped moving and, in perfect unison, turned their heads toward the staircase, every single one of them. Their necks creaked as they moved. One of the girls in the group whispered, "We need to go." But the nearest guest, a woman in a cracked porcelain mask, tilted her head and whispered back in a voice too deep to belong to her, "You just arrived." The students bolted for the door. They ran down the hallway, past the tables, knocking over glasses. The guests didn't chase them, not at first. They just watched, hundreds of eyes staring as the group shoved the front door open. Except outside wasn't outside anymore. Where the porch should have been, there was another room. The same chandeliers, the same guests, the same tables. They had run straight back into the party. Panic took over. They screamed, split up, tried every door and window. Every exit led back inside. The mansion had folded into itself, a loop of endless rooms filled with silent dancers and that piano playing somewhere far away. One by one, the students disappeared. Aaron doesn't remember how, only that he'd be running and suddenly he was alone, his friends gone. He searched for hours, calling their names, but his voice just echoed back, warped and hollow. Finally, he found the piano. It sat in the center of an empty ballroom. The keys moved on their own, pressing down in jerky rhythm. And sitting on the bench was one of his missing friends, Sarah. She was wearing a mask now, porcelain like the others. Her hands hovered above the keys, but the piano kept playing. When Aaron called her name, she turned her head slowly toward him. Her eyes were wide, glassy, and unblinking. Aaron doesn't remember what happened after that. He swears he blacked out. When he woke up, he was lying on the sidewalk outside the mansion. The house was dark, boarded up, exactly as it had always been. No lights, no guests, no piano, just silence. He was the only one who came back. None of his friends were ever found. Police said maybe they'd run away, maybe gotten lost. But Aaron insists they never left that house. Sometimes, when he passes the mansion, he says he can see light through the cracks of the boards, a chandelier glowing faintly. And if he listens closely on Halloween night, he swears he can hear the faint, sour melody of a piano drifting out into the cold air. And every year since, he has the same dream. He's back in the ballroom, wearing a porcelain mask, and the music doesn't stop. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories.